point, and we'll see if you can make a reservation yourself if you want to try to, have you ever been through museums and people, there's a speaker and then people, sort of glom onto that speaker and so on. So you can certainly do that if you feel that anything I have to say might help. Yeah. Huh?
Where?
Oh, these people can tell you what at the break. San Diego Museum of
Natural history.
Yeah, I was trying to think of
The natural history.
I was trying to think of a parody word, unnatural history. something I thought maybe I could say, but didn't go over very well. So, okay. So my friend here, who went and saw the exhibit with his wife and so on, saw something about the Kittim somewhere and didn't realize we discussed the whole thing last time. So we don't need to go over the Kittim again. We've killed that subject. So at the break, you can fill these young folks in on that particular subject. Okay, so we were talking about how the first book of Maccabees starts with coming of Alexander. Just the way all the visions in Daniel start. And actually, in answer to what you were saying, you see Daniel has the Kittim as the Romans appearing in the Eastern Mediterranean, taking on the Carthaginians and Phoenicians. First Maccabees has the Kittim as Alexander from Macedon. So any people coming from the Western seas could come under that rubric. That's the whole point. But we read certain passages, so we know now who the Kittim look like from the passages that we read earlier. So we were talking about Maccabees 1 and the how far did we get? Did we get to the point that they had moved the Feast of Tabernacles to the 25th of the month of Kislev? In any case, it's hard for me to figure out where exactly we stopped here in Maccabee books. Which chapter did we do in 1 Mac?
224.
Huh?
224.
224 we got to? So we got Mattathias leading his people basically out into the wilderness, and he is the patronymical, if you want to call it that. Patronym refers to, or eponym, someone you're going to call or hark back to as the symbol of the whole movement that we speak of in terms of Maccabees. So I've already called attention to the fact of all these Christian names. Of course, Mattathias appears among the apostles of Jesus in 2 places. He's the substitute for the supposed fall away of Judas, another Maccabean name. His name is Matthias, and then there's Matthew, who is also among the so-called apostles. Not that I accept those lists as very historical. In fact, you'll forgive me, until you prove it to me, I just speak about, the picture, not necessarily an actual historical. But the fact there are 2 Mattathiases, Matthew and Matthias, which are variations on the same names, I think speaks of some harking back to the heroic events of this movement. I also mentioned last time that I thought that without the Maccabean movement you wouldn't have Christianity, and I'll try to explain that as we go along. But what we have here in 224 to 8 is the beginning of what you have to call the Zealot movement. Now, this is not the official beginning as far as Josephus is concerned. For Josephus, the Zealot movement, if you've been reading ahead in Josephus, begins when? He calls it by numerous names. And actually, he doesn't call it the Zealot movement until very late in the war, the Jewish war presentation. He has numerous names for it, but the main name he calls it is the fourth philosophy. The fourth philosophy, or the fourth, I think it is philosophy that he calls it. And that's in both the Antiquities and the Jewish War. He has it at the same place, 4 BC to 7 CE. People say, you know, why don't you say BCE? I get tired of adding all these letters to satisfy some sort of cultural equanimity, you know. Everyone knows what I mean by BCE, and BCE is clumsy, so I got half for the Christians and half for the Jews. BC for the Christians, CE for the Jews, okay? Common error, or error, ERROR, or whatever, and before Christ, everybody knows that. Well, why 4 BC to 7 AD? Another popular way of speaking of the date. The reason most people avoid that, as I think I told you, is AD means Anno Domini, which means year of our Lord. If it's not your Lord, you often don't like to, you know, put it in that kind of formulation. So, why 4 BC to 7 AD? Well, if you look at your Josephus, what happens in 4 BC? Herod dies. And that is like Saddam Hussein dying. That gives rise to a lot of chaos. Because, you know, what we're witnessing in the modern period isn't so different than the ancient period, just the weaponry is more sophisticated. You know, people think by calling Herod the Great that he could be conceived of as a great king. He isn't great, he's a monster. It'd be better to call him Herod the Terrible, like Ivan the Terrible. Calling him Herod the Great is like almost a compliment. You know, he's Herod the thug, Herod the murderer, Herod the, you know, I would say monstrous one. And, you know, he deserves the reputation he got. He was extremely successful in his monstrousness and his cruelty and his repressiveness. And he destroyed the Jewish national ethos and situation. You say, how do you know this? Well, you could know it as well as I know it just by reading Josephus. And Josephus is not trying to present Herod in a terrible manner. He just can't avoid it because he is so terrible. And he doesn't realize, Josephus often doesn't realize what he's doing. He is presenting Herod in a fairly, probably truthful manner, and he is pretty terrible. So with his death, you see, the repressed freedom movements and other kinds of resistance groups can find expression, but it's a chaotic situation. And Josephus will describe it, and I'll read it to you next time about those uprising situations that occur at Herod's death, 4 BC. That can also help you with the Gospels, can it? If you take the Gospels in any way as historical, because I don't take these episodes as very historical, but the episode of Herod trying to kill all of the Jewish children, trying to kill Jesus as one of the Jewish children who will, in a messianic manner, supplant him. What gospel is that in? I think it's Matthew. So that, if you look at your dates, it's certainly not 0, by the way. The whole date chronology is off. So Jesus, if you take it as an historical person, and I use that term advisedly. I'm not sure how historical the character is being portrayed. There was somebody who created an impression on a lot of people, but how historical the presentation is something we'd have to argue about, and we would. Fortunately, we don't do it in this class, do it in the historical Jesus class. But he would have to be born before 4 BC, according to Matthew. How long before 4 BC? Well, nobody can say. Herod is still alive in Matthew. But what's the contradiction of that? Luke. For Luke, when is Jesus born? In the time of the census of Cyrenius. And that also is in Josephus. Now Luke seems to be reading his Josephus more carefully than Matthew. And you say, what? These guys were reading Josephus? I'm afraid they were. And we can point to, I don't have time or the ability right off the top of my head to point to where these things come through. But it's pretty clear that Luke is dependent in some places on Josephus. You say, well, what you mean Josephus was known in his own time? Yeah, he was known in his own time. And so when was he flourishing? When was he, well, he tells you when he was born. He was born in around the time that most people think Jesus died. So he's born in mid-30s, late 37, mid to late 30s. And he disappears from the scene with the composition of the Antiquities, which seems to have appeared in 93. But I think the last time we can actually get a hold of him is around 96. Some people think he lived into the early hundreds, like 103, 104, but I think he was executed in 96 myself. Now you say, why? I think he ran out of protectors. I think he ran out of people willing to, I think all the people that he knew that were protecting him and sponsoring him and fostering him were executed. And so I think he went down with them all. And he does admit in the Vita. The Vita, what work is that? The biography. Now, you say, I don't have the biography. It's in the collected works if you want it. It's very short work. It's about 25, 30 pages. It's nothing. You can read it in like half hour. And it repeats a lot of the material in the war. What? Vita, V-I-T-A. So, your Vita is your biography in work terms. So he does admit in the Vita that he's having a lot of trouble with accusations against him. That people are accusing him of having participated in the war against Rome, of having done anti-Roman things and so on and so forth, and he has to get people to support him. But I have a picture in my James book of his big sugar daddy. Epaphroditus. And he says in his introduction to the Antiquities, and in the Vita too, I can't give you the exact reference, you can find it, that this person, he dedicates all his works to him. This person had lived a very adventurous life, had survived many reversals, and was a very important person. Now, if you look in the Hall corpus, I never know if there's 2 L's or 1 L, but I'll put 2 L for the moment. It's probably wrong. I think it's 2 P's. I don't know how to spell that. Look up in the which is it, 2 L's or 2 P's? Philippians. 2 P's. Okay, if you look in the Pauline corpus, Philippians is considered an authentic work of Josephus, and he refers to Epaphroditus twice as his fellow soldier, Paul's fellow soldier in Christ or something like that, and workman in Christ. And then he says he's going to send Epaphroditus to Rome, to the household of Caesar, because Epaphroditus obviously has some inroads in the household of Caesar. Now, no one ever picks up on this, ever. I think it's a little embarrassing, and they all try to make reasons why it isn't the same Epaphroditus. I'm sure it's the same Epaphroditus that Paul's traveling colleague in Philippians, who he sends to the court of, at this time it's Nero Caesar. And later on, this Epaphroditus pops up as Nero Caesar's secretary for Greek letters. And when Nero is being run down by the people in the bodyguard that have been bribed to kill him, he's with Epaphroditus. And it's in the Roman historians. I can't give you all the references. You'll find it in a lot of references from my books. If you look in my books, you'll look up Epaphroditus in the index. You'll see that. And I'm just giving you some interesting tidbits here. Epaphroditus survives that and goes on to serve the Flavians. But later on, the last Flavian, Domitian, who's a real brute like Nero, a horrible person, he's the one for whom they had birthday games in Palestine as they made their way up the Mediterranean coast after the taking of Jerusalem. Titus had birthday games for his brother Domitian, where they, killed the Jewish captives in the ring for entertainment, or fed them to the animals, or had, combat games, and so they loved live sports then. I mean, really live sports, not like our football and stuff like that, but real. They love blood sports, but real blood sports. So they just took the captives. I mean, I know that we're supposed to have Christian martyrs, but Christian martyrs haven't raised their heads yet in this period. And these are all the Jewish captives that are being treated in this way. I'm very worried that the idea of Christian martyr in the history as it's passed down is being confused with these people, and that it's not until the maybe 2nd century that you maybe start getting Christian martyrs. After this generation of prisoners, slaves, and captives have been thoroughly depleted through fun and games and blood sports in the Colosseum that they helped build with the money, as I told you, from the sacking of the temple. But in any case, Epaphroditus survives, and he becomes Domitian's secretary for Greek letters. But at some place in the 90s, that's where I think this is where you're getting Christian martyrs later on, under Domitian and thereafter. Somewhere in that period, he runs afoul of Domitian, and Domitian accuses him of having raised his hand against an emperor. It's in the Roman historians. What he means by, you see, Nero asked Domitian, apparently, this is the story, whether it's true or not, this Epaphroditus to hold the sword while he ran on him. When they would kill each other, the guy would hold the sword and they would hug the guy usually, or something like that. That's how they would kill themselves. You can't kill yourself with a sword very easily, unless you're a Japanese samurai or something and learn how to disembowel yourself. But most people, the minute it pricks your stomach, you probably pull back and quit. So it is not an easy thing. That's why so many people fail at committing suicide in such manners. But if you got someone to help you, but Domitian, whether Nero wanted it or whether Domitian was trying to kill him, I don't think, or whether Epaphroditus was trying to kill Nero, I don't think he was, used that he raised his hand against an emperor as excuse for executing him. And I think if Epaphroditus went, Josephus would have done it. Because I said he's the person that he dedicates on. So he's a very important sponsor. And I think in the Roman court, I can't go any deeper in that, there's a whole bunch of crypto-Christians that are functioning there. And in fact, we find out that the pseudo-Clementines, something most of you may or may not have heard of, which are written in the name of, they're called pseudo because the church considers them pseudo. But, they're no more pseudo than any other document in this period. Clementines. I mean, and I could call pseudo-Matthew, pseudo-Mark. They're all pseudo. You know, to call them the pseudo-Clementines makes you think negatively of them. False Clementines. False everything in this period, okay? False, let's see if I can, false Enoch. False Daniel. False second Isaiah, you know, and so on and so forth. If you like it, you don't call it pseudo. If you don't like it, you call it pseudo. So, I don't want to trip on your thing here. I don't want.
Me too.
Yeah, I'll put it over there just to make sure that I know.
Works for me.
Okay. So, Epaphroditus then is a pretty important fellow. I don't think, yeah, here's his name over here. And that's who he dedicated all his work to. So this is in the Antiquities that we're talking about. And I said Luke is dependent to a certain extent on the Antiquities. I got into this by telling you that these documents were circulating. They were being encouraged. Epaphroditus wanted Josephus to write a history of the period. He wrote two. He wanted information. His group wanted information about Palestine in this period. They used Josephus as a source of this. And for a while, Epaphroditus, and I think this is the same person that was Paul's traveling companion. And that's not a provable point, but how many Epaphroditus are running around, you know, in this period? So you look in Philippians, and how many are being sent to Nero's court? You know, I mean, what, there were two Epaphroditus running around Nero's court? I kind of doubt. Two Epaphroditus interested in Middle Eastern Jewish things? I don't think so. But anyway, that's for you people to think about the rest of your life. I just want to point that out. So, yes, these things were being thought about. So, in the Gospel of Luke, the census of Cyrenius is the trigger for his birth narrative. So, Jesus is born in 7 AD in the Gospel of Luke, 6 to 7 AD. And I've said in all my other classes I've ever taught that one cancels the other out. You can't reconcile the two accounts. Well, what people do is they conflate. You know what conflate means? They put the two accounts together and they make a single account in their mind. So Jesus is born in a manger, and there's a star over Bethlehem, and there's no room at the inn, and Herod wants to kill all of the Jewish children, and so on. They conflate the two accounts, but you can't. Two accounts are mutually contradict each other, mutually contradictory. In fact, they mutually destroy each other. So that you can't tell anything about Jesus' birth, because in the one account, I'll see how clever you are, Jesus is living in Bethlehem and leaves because of what? Herod wanted to kill all of the Jewish children. And where does he go? To Egypt. His father flees to Egypt. Later he moves to Galilee, according to Matthew. But in the other account, he's already living in Galilee, and because of the census of Cyrenius, his family has to go to Bethlehem to be counted, because they're Bethlehem. Why would they be interested in living in Bethlehem? Bethlehem is the seat of the Davidic family. David came from Bethlehem. So in the story about Jesus, Jesus has to come from Bethlehem. Did Jesus' family really come from Bethlehem? This is what I mean. I don't know. I don't have a clue. In one of the Gospels, I think it's either Mark or John, the crowd says to Jesus, we thought the Messiah had to come from Bethlehem. In other words, you didn't come from Bethlehem, you came from Nazareth. So even one of the Gospels, you can look it up in a concordance, presents the crowd as not being aware that Jesus comes from Bethlehem. So I'm no better than the crowd. I don't know where he came from, frankly. I'll assume if he's called the Nazarene, or that his family, or the Galilean, or something like that, that he comes from the Galilee someplace originally. Well, whether he was born in Bethlehem or not, both Gospels go to great pains to get him there because of the Davidic claims to be a son of David. But these are all to my mind, literary matters. Anyway, I don't want to go into a big argument. You can believe whatever you want. You're a free person. I'm just saying that there are problems and difficulties here, and you have to try to wrestle with them to your own satisfaction. Okay, so Luke goes to great pains to get Jesus to Bethlehem to be born. Well, look, come on. You mean to say the whole Roman world was running all over the place to go home because there was a census going on? I mean, I can't even imagine that that was happening. I mean, the whole place would have been in chaos. People would have been running all over the place, and you know, it would have been like, you know, total, as I said, total anarchy. I don't think that you probably had to go home to your family seat to be counted because of a census going on. I just can't imagine that the Romans were that inefficient. So I don't know much about the Roman censuses. You can do some study of them. But Luke's, the way Luke presents it, Jesus is going to Bethlehem to get born. So because of the David thing. And therefore we get the manger thing. Because why? There's no room at the inn. There's no room at the inn, so we get the creche, and in every shopping plaza from California to Vermont, there's a creche. There's a manger. But a lot of the pagan deities were born in mangers too, so it's not clear. We even have Manger Square in Bethlehem, of course. It's not clear if that was a characteristic of some of these man-god birth scenarios. I don't think you'd be born in a manger in Palestine in December, let me tell you. Up in the mountains, it'd be pretty bloody cold up there, and the lambs and things wouldn't be skipping and so on. But look, that's because all this is retrospectively presented, maybe centuries later in Constantine's time, when all these things were, you know, fleshed out in their final form. I don't know when all these points of the construction of the presentation, I don't call it a myth or a legend because people get angry and I don't like those words. The presentation we have were put in their final form. But one thing is sure, Mark and John dispense with the infancy narratives. Why? Because they obviously knew them. They're not dumb. They knew them, but they probably felt they were unreliable and therefore did not include them. So neither Mark and John have anything. See, most people don't even know that who are believers. Mark and John don't have anything about Jesus' childhood. Where does Jesus first appear in Mark and John? Among the disciples of John the Baptist. That would seem to be a reasonable assumption, given that John the Baptist was a more well-known and important leader even in Josephus. And if John the Baptist is an Essene leader, which I think we'll probably come to the conclusion that he may have been, then that would make Jesus and others like him a member of this Essene movement that's responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls and so on. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. So they all agree that he appears among the disciples or followers of John the Baptist. Okay, that's something that maybe, if you want to start out with a historically acceptable point that nobody could shoot holes in, that would be okay. So in any case, that's exactly the time that Josephus portrays the Messianic movement or the Zealot movement beginning in Palestine. That is 7 A.D. If when we read Josephus, will be hey, I got back to where I wanted to go to. You know, I saw myself way off, but I climbed back out. 7 A.D., 6 to 7 A.D. is exactly the time that Josephus tells us Judas the Galilean, another Galilean like Jesus and his followers. I have a guy who sent me a manuscript the other day where he wants to prove Judas the Galilean was Jesus, and that the stories were taken from Judas the Galilean. So that's an interesting thesis, and the fellow has written a book on it, that's fine. And I can well understand why he would think that, and I'm not saying it doesn't have some merit or not merit to it. But in any case, all those are shots in the dark because no one is ever going to be able to prove any of these things because most of the evidences have vanished. If we could have a Shinon papyrus like we just got for the trial of the Templars at the time of one of the popes, I think his name is Clement or something or other. How many read in the paper about the Shinon papyrus? Well, I'm not even sure that's not a forgery, because it suddenly appeared out of the Vatican files, willy-nilly, about the, Da Vinci Code, Templar issue about the Templars having been tried and convicted of heresy and burned at the stake, and the whole movement destroyed in the 1300s. This Chinon papyrus is supposed to be from a pope in the 1300s who presided over some of this along with the French king. It was at the time, I think, of what we call the, what do you call it, the captivity, what's it called, of the papacy, when they moved it from Rome to Avignon. Anyway, the French king took the popes and put them in Avignon in southern France. I guess it may be called the Avignon captivity. I'm not sure, I can't remember the actual terminology for that. But this one pope would be in the pocket of the French king. But from this papyrus, he claims that he didn't think that the Templars were heretics. They only had some minor deeds that they should have been punished for, but not burned for heresy. So now, 600, 700 years later, the Vatican in Rome is now saying that the Templars should not have been convicted of heresy, should not have been burned, were not heretics, and it's okay now to think in terms of this movement. That's because it's become so popular. So I don't know if this Chinon papyrus, which is supposed to be in the actual handwritten document from that period, they say, well, where was this document for 700 years? It had been misfiled according to the authorities. It was filed under a different, it was in the wrong folder. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong, by the way. Anything's possible, I mean, we know what, government officials and others are like, so I mean, I'm not trying to say it, but it seems a little odd. I think they probably just felt it was a good time to release it. So the question is whether that's an accurate document. Same thing for this period. If we had a Chinon papyrus for this period that would be misfiled someplace and suddenly appear, we might be able to sort out some of these problems. But I doubt very seriously if that's the Judas the Galilean problem. But it is really interesting that the Zealot movement, there we go back to where we went, according to Josephus, is the fourth philosophy, and he has two portraits of it. One in the Jewish War, and one in the Antiquities, and those two portraits don't agree. Because in the one portrait, he says it was founded by someone called Judas the Galilean. And he doesn't call it the Zealot movement, he calls it the fourth philosophy. That's in JW. But in the Antiquities, he says it was founded by two people, Judas and somebody called Zadok or Zadok. And that is really interesting, because that means it's Zadok is a priest name, Judas is a king name, and that means that we have a priestly and a kingly sort of line going on there. And Zadok, of course, we'll find out, is one of the most important names among the Dead Sea Scrolls for considering the history of the Dead Sea Scrolls community. So what did I work backwards here? What reason I bring it all up? The question is this the founding moment of the Zealot movement here, with Mattathias saying, let everyone who has zeal for the law, line 27, and takes his stand on the covenant, come out and follow me. And he fled with his sons into the hills. And of course, there was a lot of problems. Mattathias is still the leader, but Mattathias makes a ruling because a lot of people were not yet fighting on the Sabbath. Now, how far in 2 Maccabees, could you put your finger there? How far in 2 Maccabees did we get last time? Did we get into it at all? Well, what I showed you in 2 Maccabees, I recall, was that 2 Maccabees does not begin with Mattathias. 2 Maccabees begins with a letter to the Jews of Egypt. And I think I told you that I thought this was a pretty authentic sounding letter. Do you remember this letter, or didn't we read through the whole thing? We didn't read it, so we're going to have to look at it then. Greetings to their brothers, the Jews of Egypt. From their brothers, the Jews in Jerusalem. That's already a very low-key greeting. And where would this letter then have been found if it was a letter from the Jews of Jerusalem, or they didn't even call it Judea, they called it Jerusalem, which makes a lot of sense to me, because I don't think Judea, or whatever you want to call it, extended very much outside the confines of Jerusalem. Same Jerusalem that the Israeli government is getting ready to negotiate back to some other folks in the next couple of months, because the Bush administration wants a victory somewhere in the Middle East. And they have a lame duck prime minister in Israel who wants to make a name for himself and has no backing anywhere. But if he can get himself a treaty, maybe he'll look good. In the meantime, he's going to cough up stuff that will never be able to be taken back in an official way for another 2 millennia. These are really fateful moments in the history of these matters, if you're interested in that. We're watching, everyone's so bored with it and fed up with it. No one's paying any attention to it. Anyway, the Jews of Jerusalem, in the country of Judea, and the country of Judea. So that really sounds pretty good. May God prosper you, remembering his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, his faithful servants. May give you all a heart to worship him and do his will with a generous and a willing spirit. By the way, mine may differ from yours, but this is good enough, you know. May open your hearts to the laws and the precepts, or the laws and the ordinances, if you don't want. So once again, to the law, to his law, and to his law and the ordinance. So once again, the Mosaic law is not as Paul describes it in Corinthians, in 2 Corinthians 2 to 3. You remember that section where he has Moses? I told you about that section, right? We went through that one section where he has Moses as a charlatan. Did we do that? Well, let me just do it quick in case you've forgotten it. Let's see, I'll find it here quickly. I've got so many different Bibles that it's hard for me. I like to make it clear. We did the Galatians material, but in 2 Corinthians, I think he says, ending in, he's going around Macedonia in 2:13 of 2 Corinthians. We are Christ's incense to God for those who are being saved, and so on. Does this sound like a new attempt, chapter 3, to commend ourselves? Because the problem in 2 Corinthians is Paul doesn't have any letters of recommendation from the Jerusalem leadership. So he's got to find more spiritual, esoteric, or allegorical ways of recommending themselves. Unlike other letter people, we don't need letters of recommendation. To be an apostle, theoretically, you were supposed to have a letter from James. That's what's behind what he's talking about here. We consider this an authentic letter of Paul. Either to you, because you yourselves are our letter. Here's the spiritualization going forward, the metaphorical presentation of things, the allegorical thing I told you about in Galatians 4. It's the same spirit, so it's the same person probably writing it. I think that's pretty obvious. Either to you or from you, because you are our letter written on your hearts, that anyone can see and read. And it's plain you are a letter from Christ, drawn up by us, written not with ink. He's very eloquent. But with the Spirit of the living God, not, and here it is, not on stone tablets. So he's attacking the stone tablets, the law of Moses. Now these people have just written a letter in Egypt. That's why I'm telling you about these things, recommending to keep his law. So you see, it's exactly the opposite of what they are involved in. But on the tablets of your living heart, all of this is very good if you like literature and if you're interested in imagery, but it wouldn't go down to people who care about the law. Anyway, this is the way he presents himself, and I don't have time to do the whole thing. He is the one who has given us the qualification to be the administrators of the new covenant. The new covenant will be in the scrolls, which is not a covenant of written letters, not the law of Moses, but of the Spirit. I teach spiritual things spiritually, Paul says. So the law of Moses is gone by the boards. I don't mind. I have no truck for the law of Moses personally, in the sense that I don't keep all of the aspects of it. But I'm trying to give you the Spirit. You see, he then goes on to say, which is really one of the greatest insults one religion ever said about another, the written letters which bring death, but the Spirit gives life. So the law of Moses, the two tablets, they bring death. But what he's talking, of course, symbolically too. He wants to say that that's the ministry of death. But all this, if you read this, of course, you will get a negative feeling about the law of Jews and so on and so forth. You just can't help it. So, I mean, 2 millennium of this has had a horrifying effect, both of the people who are on the one side of it and the people on the other side of it. Because the people on the other side of it have had to face this, and they've developed some characteristics maybe that people who have to face this kind of treatment and mindset develop. You know, it gets very tough for their children. Now, if the ministry of death in the written letters engraved on stones, have you got any doubt what he's talking about? The 10 Commandments, was accompanied by such a brightness that the Israelites could not bear looking on the face of Moses. Where's that? In the desert, when Moses goes into the tent of meeting in Exodus and other books, he comes out irradiated because he's in God's presence, supposedly. And that's what Paul is talking about, those passages where he comes out. And so he had to put a veil over his face. Why in the Old Testament did Moses have to put a veil over his face? So that other people wouldn't be irradiated and burned when they came near him in his presence, because he'd been in the presence of God in theory, and therefore his face was shining with radiation. Now, look, I admit this is literary. I'm not claiming that this is absolute historical truth any more than the other is, okay? This is what I mean by literary documents, but still, it's precious to the people who possess it, okay? So they think that that's like saying, what's going to happen here is like saying that the covenant of Moses is actually the covenant of Hagar and Sinai. Where's that? Galatians 4. The covenant of the slave woman, and therefore cast out the slave woman. We're the free people because we are the free wife, not the slave wife, and so on and so forth. It's more of the allegorical spiritualization he likes to, and polemics that he likes to indulge in. It was accompanied by such a brightness the Israelites could not bear to look on the face of Moses. But for Paul, it was a brightness that has faded. Then how much greater will the brightness that surrounds the administering of the Spirit, our new brightness from our new covenant, from our new spiritualized, gnosticized, as you were trying to say, approach to things. How much brighter would that be? For if there was any splendor in the administering of the condemnation, the result for Paul is that the covenant of Moses is the covenant of condemning, the covenant of condemnation, where ours is the covenant of life. There must be very much greater splendor in the covenant or administration of justification. In fact, compared with the splendor, by the way, the mystical book of the Jews is called the splendor, and I think it originally got its name from the splendor on Moses' face after he came into the presence of the Lord. So here Paul shows that he understands the Zohar, the book of splendor that the Jews who seek the mystical approach were involved in for 1,000 years after this, until it was published in the Middle Ages around the year 12 or 1300. So I think you see it was the splendor on Moses' face. In fact, compared with the great splendor, the thing used to have such splendor now seems to have none. And what was temporary, that anyway, he's back with his back and forth on words, splendor, splendor, splendor. He goes on like this. Having this hope, we can be quite confident, not like Moses, who put a veil over his face, so the Israelites would not notice the ending of what had to fade. And anyway, their minds have been dulled. Indeed, to this very day, the same veil is still there where the old covenant is being read. A veil never lifted, since Christ alone can remove it. Yes, even today, whenever Moses read, the veil is over their minds. Well, this is a great jump on the veil imagery. But the point is, what he's saying is Moses is a charlatan. Moses didn't put a veil over his face because it was so bright nobody could stand the radiation when he came out among the presence of God. Moses put a veil over his face so that the people wouldn't know that the light of the covenant had gone out. In other words, he was a cheat and a fraud. You say you jumped a step. Yeah, I jumped a step, but that's what he's saying. So you see, you're saying, I believe. I'm spiritually uplifted. Okay, that's fine. You should be. It's a very eloquent presentation. But look, if you're the butt of this, you'd be very offended. You'd be very offended. I don't think any religion has ever spoken about the parent religion in such a manner as that. And nobody pays any attention to it. They just let it slide by. Okay, fine. I wouldn't mind if Paul just had the imagery of splendor, that the Christ spiritualization brings new, renewed splendor. But when he says that Moses is a charlatan and a cheater, and he's put a veil there not to cover his face so that people wouldn't be irradiated, but so that people wouldn't know that what had to go out had gone out, then even if it's allegorization or otherwise, it still is quite offensive. So I'm going to read you that to show you some really anti-law things in Paul's things. I could go page by page by page by page. See, the difference is that you who study these things in religious environments or institutions only are looking for the uplift, and it certainly is there. And so you don't see these other things. And okay, I acknowledge the uplift is there, but you don't see the negative things, not towards you, but towards some other people that have been been forced to be the recipients of this and ended up, I believe, in Holocaust situations, ultimately, because of the pervasiveness of this attitude towards them in the Western world in which they were forced to live. And none of us want that guilt on us and so on. Okay. I wanted to read you that because I read you the Galatians 4 material, and those are two of the most vivid presentations of what I'm talking about. Why do I want to read them? Because as we go along, we're going to deal with someone in the movement who denies the law in the midst of the whole congregation. And, we have a character here who fits that description. If there are some people who are supporting the law and others who are denying it within the movement itself, then we have a possible candidate. So I wouldn't say that this person in the scrolls is Paul. That's going to depend on the dating and whether we think the righteous teacher is a James-like character. But it's a Paul-like character, someone in the movement who splits with the leadership of the movement on the issue of the law. On the issue of the law. Why do I say he splits with the leadership? Because even Acts 21:21, as I read you last time, but I will repeat, because it has to do with this zeal for the law and zealot movement that we're talking about now. So we have this passage. You asked me what number was 21:21. And the next day Paul went up with us to James, and this is a reliable section of Acts most people think is what we call the we document, because it's spoken of in terms of us and we. I don't mind reading it a second time because it fits in with all this. And greeted them. He told them one by one what God had worked among the Gentiles by his ministry, and they glorified God. And they said to him, really they're complaining, and it's James speaking, but you see, brothers, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and all are zealots for the law. And the actual Greek, all zelotai to nom. All zealots for the law. So this is James speaking. And so clearly, and they hear that you are teaching the Jews among the Gentiles not to circumcise their children. We did this, and the reason for that is the symbol of the covenant, and so on. And so therefore, we have some people under vow here. Take them into this place. We know you've brought money up because you've been fundraising overseas, and we want you to do this: shave their heads and yours, follow this Nazarite oath, as it's called, line 24. I'm reading it quick so that, because we've already done it once, to show that you yourself also regularly walk keeping the law. It's James demanding that Paul regularly walk keeping the law, and this is in the Christian Bible book of Acts. And you say, why do you believe that? Because it's a part of Acts that's in the we form that looks, everyone has acknowledged it looks more reliable than some other type materials. And I don't see anything to disagree with it. It sounds reasonable. Anyway, when he goes in the temple, 7 days go by, and some Jews from Asia, line 27, Asia is Asia Minor, where he is doing all of the preaching that is spoken about earlier in Acts, saw him, stirred up the people, laid hands on him, cried out, "Men, Israelites, help! This is the man who teaches all everywhere against the people, against the law, and against this place." And now he has brought non-Jews, Greeks. It's like the Kaaba in Mecca. You're not allowed to bring non-Muslims into the temple and defile the holy place, because there are people who are in here who have not taken the law, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying who's right or wrong in this argument. I just want to show you that there is a problem in the movement itself that we regularly don't hear about. So, and the problem has to do with the law and all things relating to the law. So back to our letter. So the letter says, let's go back here to Maccabees 2. May he open your hearts to the law and its ordinances and give you peace. When Demetrius was king in the year 169, we Jews wrote you as follows. Well, I don't know when Demetrius was king, but 169 is the Seleucid year. And I think Demetrius is king somewhere after Antiochus Epiphanes dies in Maccabees 1. And so we wrote you this way. In the desperate affliction that has come upon us in these years since Jason and his associates betrayed the Holy Land and the kingdom, they burned the temple gateway, shed innocent blood. Then we prayed to the Lord, and when we were heard, we offered a sacrifice with wheat flour, kindled the lamps, set out loaves. And now we recommend you to keep the Feast of Tabernacles in the month of Kislev in the year 188. Again, there may be a footnote in your Bibles. I got 124 BC for that, I think. In any case, this is an actual letter they wrote to Egypt in 124 BC. Who would have kept this letter? The Egyptian Jews. It would have been in their records. Is it an authentic letter? I don't see anything wrong with it. It's nothing wild or frantic or beyond belief. I think it probably is. So now already we see that 2 Maccabees, or Maccabees 2, is more detailed than 1 Maccabees, and goes back earlier. That is, it goes into the infighting of what was going on before Mattathias supposedly led the uprising. So who's the priestly hero of 2 Maccabees if Mattathias is the priestly hero of 1 Maccabees? Huh? Onias. And he's called the saintly and righteous Onias. And he's from the previous high priest line. And he is at one point also called a zealot for the laws. Let me see if I can move along quickly through this so we can move along. The letter continues with a second letter line 10. The people of Jerusalem and Judea, the Senate and Judas, to Aristobulus, tutor to King Ptolemy, and one of the families of the anointed priests, and to the Jews of Egypt, greetings and good health. Well, this is the second letter, this one, written by Judas Maccabee himself. And he talks about what happened. Since God rescued us from great dangers, we give thanks for championing our cause against the king. So it's after he wins that stage of the struggle and purifies the temple. This kind of, plugs into Daniel to some extent. He goes on with some details, extremely details. Line 18. And we shall be celebrating the purification of the temple on the 25th of Kislev. We consider it proper to notify you so that you may celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles and of the fire that appeared when Nehemiah, the builder of the temple and the altar, offered sacrifice. When some years had elapsed in God's time, Nehemiah, commissioned by the king of Persia, sent descendants and priests who had hidden the fire to recover it. What's this? Raiders of the lost ark. The fire that had never gone out. This is, of course, what they believed. It's a mythological thing that had occurred back in Nehemiah's time. But notice here, I don't know if I mentioned last time, but if I didn't, if I did, it's worth repeating. I have grave doubts about Ezra. This book, for instance, is one of many books that does not either know of or mention an Ezra. You say, I don't even know who either of them are. Yeah, I know you don't, a lot of you. But they're biblical books. They're the last books. I've got to keep my finger in this thing here, so I'll put this thing. They're the last books, really, historical books of the Bible. What are they called? The Book of Ezra, the Book of Nehemiah. But they overlap a lot. And it's not really clear, and they are pictured as doing similar or the same things. But what's Nehemiah's position in the Persian court? God, you're jumping around. Yeah, because I want you to understand these things. Let me see. What's Nehemiah's position in the Persian court, according to the books that we haven't read? Cupbearer. He's in the actual inner household of the Persian king. To be in the inner household of the Persian king, you have to be a eunuch. Why did you have to be a eunuch? Because the Persian king had a lot of women in his harem, maybe 100 wives or so, and didn't trust any men around there who weren't suitably changed so that they were never going to have a suspicion attached to them of any kind. So Nehemiah would have had to have been a eunuch. Now, according to strict Jewish or Mosaic law, he would not be able to perform at the temple in any kind of authentic manner if he was in such a state of such kind of defects. You say, well, that's very horrible law. Well, I'm not judging whether the law is good or bad or horrible or strict or lenient, or I'm just telling you what it was. You say, well, Paul's right. Yeah, well, maybe he's right, but not to speak like that, I think. You wouldn't like me speaking like that about something and so on. I don't think he's right the way he speaks, the way his attitude is not full of love, charity. He doesn't have a Christian charity, in my mind. He doesn't practice or present. He's a very jealous person, very aggressive person, very envious and very dictatorial. He doesn't project the kind of humility, meekness, and charity that we normally associate with good Christianity and so on. So, I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything that you couldn't see for yourself. So, yeah, maybe the law is overburdening and has some burdensome characteristics. So, okay. Nehemiah wouldn't be able to serve in the temple. So to my mind, an Ezra character was literally created as an overwrite to Nehemiah. I have all this in my Maccabees, Zadokites, Christians, and Qumran book that you have in that book called The Dead Sea Scrolls and the First Christians. You can read it if you're interested. I go through it pretty quickly, and I have all the footnotes related to it to show that the genealogy given Ezra is totally artificial. It's the same genealogy as the previous high priest had, a person called Jesus and Jehoshaphat. I don't want to mix you all up with all this. It's in that book if you want to. I'm not going to hold you responsible for this kind of material, but if you're curious, notice this ZDK thing, Jesus ben Jehoshaphat. That is the previous high priest. Ezra has the same genealogy as that person. So, you know, I have doubts about the character. I think it's more of a overwrite. And this book, you see, doesn't mention it at all. The reason I said it's a kind of, if you remember the Raiders of the Lost Ark, what's the hero of that guy looking for? He's looking for the covenant. I mean, for the Ark of the Covenant and all that kind of thing. And here's the material. You see, look here, down in chapter 2. We find in the archives that the prophet Jeremiah, when he had given the deportees the order to take the fire, as we just described, in giving the law, warned the deportees never to forget the Lord's precepts. The document also described how the prophet, warned him by an oracle, gave orders for the tabernacle and the ark to go with him when he set off for the mountain which Moses had claimed to survey when he set out for them to survey God's heritage. That would be Mount Nebo. Mount Nebo, N-E-B-O, if you know your Bible, in Jordan, right across the Dead Sea. On his arrival, Jeremiah found a cave into which he brought the tabernacle and the ark and the altar of the incense. So look, here's all your clues if you want to look for the Ark of the Covenant and so on and so forth. So you'll have to read all. I can't read it all, but now look at line 13. In addition to the above, it has also been recorded both in the archives that we have and in the memoirs of Nehemiah. Memoirs of Nehemiah? I never heard of that book. They have books we don't have. How he founded a library and made a collection of the books dealing with the kings and the prophets. Ha 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 ha. According to this letter, who collected the Bible in the manner that we have it? Nehemiah. The writings of David, what are they? The Psalms, maybe there were other writings too. And the letters of the kings on the subjects of offerings. The letters of the kings on the subjects of offerings? Never heard of it. Another book that they know or mention that has not obviously survived. Do I think this is worthy of credence? Yeah, I think when you get information like this that wouldn't normally be made up and it goes against the popular view, it probably has a lot of credibility to it, because a person wouldn't put it in there if he wanted you to be convinced, because you know, it's not what you expect to read. In the same way, Judas Maccabee, made a complete collection of the books dispersed in the late war, and these we still have. This is the letter, don't forget, they wrote an earlier letter. If you need any of them, send someone to fetch copies for you. Judas Maccabee collected the Bible finally in the way we know it, according to this thing. Now, Jews don't even know this. Christians don't really know it because they don't read this book, but it's not even in the Jewish literature, because where is this book found? In the Catholic Bible. Now, the Catholics have it in their Bible. They don't read it to any extent, I don't think. Forgive me correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings on that score. If you read it, great, I'm happy. So they know more about Jewish Hanukkah than actually Jews do. Yeah, they know more about Jewish Hanukkah than Jews do. It's in their scriptures. Protestant Bible's based on the Jewish Bible, so it's gone again. But this is really interesting stuff. Hey, Judas is a big guy. He's more important than we think he is. Do I credit this? Well, further along, this book says it's based on another book. Do you remember where it says that? It's based on an epitome of a book written by Jason of Cyrene. Did I skip it someplace? Do you see? What is it? Line 20. I didn't get to it yet. Thanks a lot. Really, thanks a lot. I would have gotten there, but I didn't get there. So, thanks. All this already related in 5 books by Jason of Cyrene, we shall attempt to condense into a single document. So this is just an epitome of a much bigger history book that has also since been lost. And do I agree with that? Yeah. Now, mostly, 2 Maccabees is, people have a dim view of 2 Maccabees. They think it's an inferior book to 1 Maccabees. I'm not sure it's inferior. One of the reasons I think it's inferior is because it has a lot of miraculous events in it. Heavenly horsemen. In a moment we're going to get the first introduction of a heavenly horseman. What does the heavenly horseman do? He beats the messenger from the Seleucid king, I guess in the temple, because he had been mean to Onias the priest, who was legitimate and very pious and very righteous high priest. And he beats him almost to death. Let me see if I can find you that here. See, this is all very complicated in Maccabees too. Chapter 3. He had already, 24, he had already arrived with his bodyguard near the treasury when the sovereign of spirits in every power caused so great an apparition that all who dared to accompany Heliodorus as the messenger of the Seleucid king were dumbfounded at the power of God and were reduced to abject terror. Before their eyes appeared a horse richly caparisoned and carrying a fearsome rider, probably the first horseman of the Apocalypse in the Revelation book, rearing violently. It struck at Heliodorus with his forefeet. Oh, the horse struck him with his forefeet. The rider was seen to be accoutred entirely in gold. Ah, the forerunner of who? Sir Galahad in the Arthur stories. He comes accoutred in gold. 2 other young men of outstanding strength. Who are they? Oh, the 2 angels in Jesus' tomb who say, he has already gone before you to Galilee. 2 other young men in outstanding strength and radiant beauty, magnificently apparelled, appeared to him at the same time, and taking their stand on either side, flogged him unremittingly, and stroke after stroke. Was very, very dramatic. Suddenly Heliodorus fell to the ground, enveloped in thick darkness, and he was just about to die, prostrate under the divine visitation. You're supposed to have read this, you guys. I'm not supposed to do all the work in this class. You know, you're supposed to do something. And it goes on there to line 31. Some of Heliodorus' companions quickly begged Onias to call upon the Most High to bestow life on the man lying at the very point of death. The high priest, afraid the king might suspect the Jews of some foul play concerning this situation, did indeed offer a sacrifice for the man's recovery, and while the high priest was performing the rite of atonement, the same young men again appeared to Heliodorus wearing the same apparel, standing beside him, said, "Be grateful to Onias the high priest, since it is for his sake that the Lord has granted you your life. And as for you who have been scourged from heaven, you must proclaim to all men the grandeur of God's power." So saying that, okay, they vanished. So this is why this book doesn't have a great reputation, because of episodes like that. But if you get rid of the charged emotion and clearly literary parts of it and just stick to the historical data, I think some of it is more reliable than 1 Mac. This book, if you've read it, and I don't want to ask how many have read it because I see almost none of you have. If you've read it, I don't want to embarrass you and make you say yes when you say no. If you've read it, it ends where? With Judas Maccabee's great victories and being given the messianic battle sword by who? In other words, it's kind of almost like a messianic book in honor of Judas Maccabee. He gets the messianic battle sword from the prophet Jeremiah and Onias. Onias has already been killed. He has been executed by the Seleucids. You all understand who the Seleucids are. We're not going to go over that again. In Syria and the Ptolemies in Egypt are struggling here. By this time, the Seleucids are on the rise and in control of a lot of this area. So we have a huge picture from chapter 4 onwards of the infighting here, of the situation before the coming of Judas. Let us go back here. God. Let's go back here to line 19. My Bible makes it easy for me to find these things because of the titles. You have the same Bible. It really is easy, isn't it, to go back and find these things. If you've just got a Bible as a single narrative, you're dead in the water. You can't jump around, you know, like that Bible you have with the 2 columns. I know it's cheaper, but the point of the matter is you just can't find anything. And that's why this kind of Bible that I have recommended to you, somehow, you know, look at this, you know, I can just whip back and I can find it. Here it is, 19, the compiler's preface. Here are my titles here. I mean, I can find my stuff lickety split. You know, I just recommend if you care about Bible studies, get yourself a Bible that'll help you study, not that you lose everything that you're trying to remember, and you know, that you can't find. This Bible, I've always felt, is the best laid out Bible I've ever seen. Of course, they stopped printing. I guess it was too good. It was produced by the École Biblique in Jerusalem. Supposedly my inveterate enemies. I've been selling them Bibles for 35 years, helping them support themselves. They never gave me any credit for selling their Bible all over the Western world. I think they should give me. I think they should give me a bonus. I think they should. What do you give people who are good salesmen? You give them not just a raise. What do you give them?
Commission.
A commission or a bonus, some prize. You know, they should give me something. But love, some charity. Okay,